The notice on my dock. It was a quiet Saturday morning at Lakeside Estates. The mist hung low over the water, and the only sound was the gentle lap of waves against my dock. I'd just poured my coffee when I noticed something fluttering on one of the dock posts, a bright orange paper taped over my private property sign. As I got closer, my jaw tightened. It was an HOA violation notice, but not just any violation. It stated that my Lakehouse property was being considered for community use. Apparently, the HOA board, led by none other than Karen Prescott, had voted to repurpose the lakefront for public access and boating events. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, lived 3 houses down. She was notorious for policing lawns, measuring fences, and leaving passive-aggressive notes about mailbox paint. But this time, she'd crossed a line. I stormed up the hill toward her house, still clutching the notice. She was outside trimming her perfect hedges, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other. "Karen," I called out. She looked up, smiling that fake, sugary smile. "Oh, hi, Alex. I see you got our notice. Isn't it exciting? The community's been talking about opening lake access for months." "Exciting?" I said, my voice low. "You're trying to take my property." Karen adjusted her sunglasses. "Technically, the HOA charter allows us to repurpose and use land for communal benefit. You hardly ever host anyone there. Alex, it's selfish not to share such a beautiful space." My patience snapped. "It's my land. You don't get to repurpose it." She shrugged, smirking. "We've already scheduled a community vote next week. If it passes, we'll proceed with filing for easement rights. You can attend, if you'd like." I stepped closer. "You're making a big mistake." Karen laughed softly, clearly thinking she had the upper hand. "Alex, the HOA has more authority than you think." I smiled back, cold and steady. "And I think you're underestimating my authority." She blinked, momentarily thrown off. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked back toward the lake, her confident smirk fading behind me. She didn't know that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was a member of the city council, and HOA decisions, especially ones that infringed on private property, had to go through us. By the time I reached my deck, my anger had sharpened into something else: strategy. I opened my laptop, pulled up the city charter, and began gathering documentation. Karen might have her clipboard and her petty rules, but I had the law and the power to make her regret this little stunt. As the sun broke through the clouds and shimmered over the lake, I made a silent promise. This was my home, my property, and I wasn't about to let an HOA tyrant rewrite the rules. The community meeting showdown. The following Thursday, the Lakeside Estates clubhouse buzzed with tension. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors whispered, and the HOA board sat at the front like judges in a small-town trial. And of course, Karen Prescott sat dead center, her signature blonde bob perfectly styled, her clipboard gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I took a seat near the back, letting her bask in the spotlight a moment longer. She was already in full performance mode. "Thank you, everyone, for attending," she began, her voice dripping with self-importance. "We're here to discuss the proposal for expanding community access to the lakefront, which would include a section of Mr. Alex Carter's property." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Some people nodded approvingly. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Karen continued, "Our HOA's goal is unity. A shared dock and picnic area would improve property values and create togetherness. Isn't that what we all want?" She smiled, proud of her speech. I raised my hand. "Question," I said, keeping my tone calm. "How exactly does the HOA have the authority to seize privately owned land for public use?" Karen tilted her head, clearly annoyed I'd interrupted her show. "Alex, the board has reviewed our bylaws thoroughly. Section 12B states that common areas can be expanded if approved by a 2/3 majority." I leaned back, keyword being common areas. My property isn't one. You can't turn private land into community space without going through city channels. A few people looked at me, curious. Karen tried to wave me off. "Alex, let's not get political." "Oh, but it is political," I interrupted, standing now. "Because you see, as a member of the city council, I'm quite familiar with the municipal code. And this little plan of yours? It's illegal." The room went dead silent. Karen's smile froze. I held up the copy of the city charter I'd printed. "Property rights in this county are protected under Article 4, Section 6. Any attempt by an HOA to repurpose private land without owner consent is a violation of both city and state statutes. Karen stammered. I was told, our attorney. Your attorney, I said, should probably review the updated ordinances from last year. Otherwise, this board could face fines and possibly lawsuits. A few neighbors started whispering louder now. One of them muttered. Karen's composure cracked. This meeting isn't over, she snapped. We'll revisit this matter. Please do, I said, smiling thinly. But next time, make sure your proposal doesn't break half a dozen laws. I gathered my papers and started toward the door. The whispers turned into quiet applause from the back rows. Karen sat frozen at the front, cheeks burning red beneath her perfect makeup. For once, the clipboard queen had no words. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I knew this wasn't finished. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly, and neither was I. The retaliation. By the next morning, the calm over the lake had vanished. I woke to the sound of hammering outside my window. When I looked out, I couldn't believe what I saw too. HOA maintenance workers were installing a community access path sign right beside my dock. I threw on my jacket and stormed outside. Hey, who authorized that? One of them, looking nervous, said, Ms. Prescott told us the board approved it. We're just following orders. Of course. Karen. Within minutes, I was at her doorstep again. She answered before I could knock twice, already defensive. Oh, Alex. What brings you here so early? I held up my phone, recording. Care to explain why your crew is trespassing on my property again? Her smile faltered. It's not trespassing. The board voted to begin preliminary construction for community improvements. On private land, I said. You're doubling down on an illegal act. I warned you, Karen. She crossed her arms. You can't scare me with your city council badge. Alex, this neighborhood follows HOA rules, not your city politics. That's when I realized something. Karen truly believed she was untouchable. To her, HOA power was absolute. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'll be filing a cease and desist order by noon, I said. And if your workers set one more foot on my land, I'll have them escorted off by the sheriff. Her expression darkened. You think you can bully me? You'll regret this. Funny, I said. I was just about to say the same to you. By afternoon, I'd made a few calls to the city zoning office, the legal department, and my colleague at the mayor's office. Within hours, an official notice was issued to the HOA. Unauthorized land alteration under investigation. That evening, I sat on my dock watching the sunset reflect off the water. Peaceful again, at least for now. But I knew Karen wouldn't take the blow quietly. Sure enough, a few days later, she struck back. I received an email titled Urgent HOA Review, filled with fabricated complaints, lawn overgrowth, improper dock lighting, and non-compliance with community standards. It was laughable, but it also made one thing clear. She was going to use every trick in the HOA book to make my life miserable. I couldn't fight her with anger. Not yet. I needed proof. So, I started gathering evidence, screenshots, recordings, neighbor statements. And then, I found something golden. One of my city contacts forwarded an internal document showing that Karen had applied for a personal grant from a local development fund to improve the lakefront for public events. That meant she was trying to seize my property to benefit herself financially. I stared at the document, a slow grin spreading across my face. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about corruption. Karen thought she could bully me with fake fines and HOA letters. But she had no idea that the next meeting would expose her in front of everyone. The exposure. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread across Lakeside Estates that something big was about to happen. Every chair was taken, neighbors stood along the walls, and the air was thick with curiosity. Karen sat at the front as always, her clipboard resting neatly on her lap, her expression icy but composed. I could tell she was nervous, though her hands fidgeted with her pen as the chatter grew louder. Let's begin, she said tightly. Tonight, we'll be discussing the status of the community lake access project and reviewing some violations. I stood up before she could finish. Actually, before we do that, I have a few documents that concern the integrity of this board. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold and sharp. Mr. Carter, you are not on the board agenda. True, I said, holding up a folder. But I am on the city council, which means I can request the floor. When HOA actions violate municipal law and city funds, a ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Karen stiffened. City funds? What are you talking about? I stepped forward and placed the document on the table in front of her. This, I said, is your grant application to the Lakeside Development Fund, filed under your name, using HOA letterhead requesting $25,000 to improve community waterfront access on my property. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face went pale. That's a misunderstanding. I was doing it for the neighborhood. I shook my head. You filed it under your personal tax ID, which means you stood to profit from a project that involved taking private land without consent. That's not community service, Karen. That's fraud. The HOA treasurer, a quiet older man, spoke up. Is this true, Karen? She stammered. I only wanted to help. Help yourself, you mean? I said. You used your position to manipulate the board and mislead homeowners. That's grounds for immediate removal. The room erupted. People who once feared her were now speaking out. Stories about bogus fines, selective enforcement, even intimidation. One neighbor shouted, "She threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway." Another added, "She fined me for flowers that weren't community approved." Karen's power crumbled before everyone's eyes. The treasurer finally banged the gavel. Effective immediately, Karen Prescott is suspended. Karen stood up, trembling with fury. You can't do this. I am the HOA. I looked her in the eye. Not anymore. She stormed out of the clubhouse, the sound of her heels echoing down the hall. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors came up to thank me. One said softly, "It's about time someone stood up to her." Later that evening, I walked down to my dock. The lake was calm again, the reflection of the moon rippling gently across the surface. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Karen's reign was over. The Lakehouse was safe. And the HOA? It had finally remembered what community was supposed to mean.